and welcome to our second Thursday Thoughts as we continue in this journey of a new discipleship way of engaging, way of learning and growing, way of teaching and fostering our compassion for people and our passion for Jesus. I want to thank you for checking out last week's video, which if you haven't yet, it's here on our channel, so feel free to do that. You can watch it at any point in time. Feel free to comment below. I did not do a very good job getting back to comments this week with the flu kind of taking me out this weekend a little bit, so I hope to get to that today, and I hope to do much better on this video here and into the future as well. So we'll post this video this morning. We'll send a link at 9 p.m. tonight to your email. That's what it'll be every Thursday. Every Thursday you'll get a link in your email at 9 p.m. for our Thursday Thoughts video. So we are jumping forward in the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible. Going from Deuteronomy, where we were last time we spoke, to Ruth now. It's not the biggest jump we have taken in our narrative lectionary journey so far this year. We're only jumping about 100 years this time, whereas before we've jumped 400 years at a time. So when last we spoke in Deuteronomy, they were on the verge of entering the promised land. They were up on the mountain. They could see the promised land. They weren't quite in it yet. So now here in Ruth, they have entered the promised land. They've been there about 100 years. And we're in what's called the time of judges. So what that means is we're not yet to where a monarchy has been established, to where there is a king. Instead, there are judges who help rule and guide and judge behaviors. And so the book of Judges was right before this, and now we're in Ruth, which takes place during that time of Judges. And we're going to pick up Ruth at the very beginning, chapter 1, verses 1 through 17. Ruth is really a short book in the Bible, and is considered one of the forgotten books of the Bible. So I recommend that not only do you read this Ruth 1 through 17, but read the rest of Ruth as well. It's a story that some of us know, but I think it's always amazing to reread it and be like, oh, I didn't realize that's how it went, or I didn't realize that took place, or this isn't quite the Sunday school version I was taught. So we're going to read here in Ruth 1 through 17. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a certain man of Bethlehem in Judea went to live in the country of Moab, he and his wife and 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife Naomi, and the names of his 2 sons were Malon and Chilion. They were Ephrates from Bethlehem in Judea. They went into the country of Moab and remained there. But Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. These 2 took Moabite wives. The name of one was Orpah, and the name of the other Ruth. When they had lived there about 10 years, both Malon and Chilion also died, so that the woman was left without her 2 sons and her husband. Then she started to return with her daughters-in-law from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the country of Moab that the Lord had considered his people and given them food. So she set out from the place where she had been living, she and her 2 daughters-in-law, and they went on their way back to the land of Judah. But Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go back, each of you, to your mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you, as you have dealt with the dead and with me. The Lord grant that you may find security, each of you, in the house of your husband." Then she kissed them, and they wept aloud. They said to her, "No, we will return with you to your people." But Naomi said, "Turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Do I still have sons in my womb that they may become your husbands? Turn back, my daughters, go your way. for I am too old to have a husband. Even if I thought there was hope for me, even if I should have a husband tonight and bear sons, would you then wait until they were grown? Would you then refrain from marrying? No, my daughters. It has been far more bitter for me than for you, because the hand of the Lord has turned against me. Then they wept aloud again. Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. So she said, "See, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law." But Ruth said, "Do not press me to leave you, or to turn back from following you. Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die. There will I be buried. May the Lord do thus and so to me, and more as well, if even death parts me from you." The word of the Lord for the people of the Lord. Thanks be to the Lord. So the story of Ruth starts with a famine. The first famine, because there's another one here in a couple of verses. So there's a famine in Bethlehem. So Naomi and her husband and their 2 sons go to Moab, where they think they will find food. So they're essentially refugees. They have nothing in this land of famine, and they have to go to another land to find food. Now, Moab, the Moabites, they are a people that came about because of an incestuous relationship between Lot and one of his daughters. So they are considered, they have multiple places in the Bible talk about how you're not to interact with Moabites, how you're not to marry a Moabite, how a Moabite will never enter into the household of God, all of these things. And so it's a very drastic decision to go to Moab as a family seeking food. It was not an easy decision. These are people that are considered unclean, dirty, kind of the enemy in a way. You're not to interact with them in any way at all. And so it was a difficult decision to go there. Then they get there, and shortly afterwards, Naomi's husband dies. 10 years later, her 2 sons, who have taken Moabite wives, which is a huge no-no, have also now died, leaving Naomi with her 2 Moabite daughter-in-laws. So you have Ruth and Orpah. So then another famine, our second famine, strikes in the land of Moab. And Naomi is left without a husband and without sons and without anyone to care for her. And she decides that her and her daughters-in-law will return to her homeland, to Bethlehem, where she has heard that there is food again, that the Lord has dealt kindly upon them. They get started on this way, and suddenly Naomi has a change of heart. She doesn't want her daughters-in-law to come with her. She wants them to go back to their mother's home. And part of her argument for this is that she has no other sons for them to marry. So in this time, it would have been a common law that if you married someone, if a woman was married to a man and he died, that his brother would then marry that woman and bear children with her in his brother's name. So this is the Levite law, and Naomi is telling Ruth and Orpah, I don't have any more sons. I don't have anyone else for you to marry. I'm not even able to bear children anymore. I have no sons in my womb, she says. I can't have children. And even if I could, would you wait until they are grown? No, go back and go to your mother's home. Find a new husband who can care for you, and may God find favor on you in your husband's home. And it's really a pretty sound argument that she's making. I want you to be taken care of. I want you to be safe. I want you to be fed. And with me, there's no one to take care of us. So after weeping, after crying together, Orpah agrees. She kisses Naomi, and she goes back to her mother's home. But Ruth clings is the word here. It's a very strong, strong word. She clings to Naomi. And then you have this beautiful speech in verses 16 and 17. Um, and this is actually used frequently at weddings. And it is Ruth pledging her allegiance, her commitment to Naomi, saying, "Do not press me to leave you or to turn back from following you. Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die. There will I be buried. May the Lord do thus and so to me, and more as well, if even death parts me from you." So this is a beautiful speech that's used at wedding services all the time. And it is Ruth saying, "No, I'm clinging to you, Naomi. You can't shake me. You can't get rid of me. This is a forever and always. I am here. We are in this together." So I always say that a wedding is a celebration of a marriage that has already taken place. And marriage is that moment when two people say, no matter what, come hell or high water, we're in this together. And they actually 100% mean that and live that. And that is what Ruth is saying to Naomi here, which is why so often it is read at weddings, is because Ruth is telling her, no matter what, it's you and me. We're in this together. I'm going to be with you. I'm going to worship your God. I'm going to go with your people. It's me and you. I'm not leaving you. I'm committed to you. And it's this amazing speech that she has here. And it shows the depth of relationship that Ruth and Naomi have with each other. I don't know, there are so many mother-in-law jokes out there, right? Well, this is like the exact opposite of every mother-in-law joke. This is like lottery winning of mother-in-law, which is kind of understandable. If you look at the names in this story, it's really interesting. So Naomi actually means pleasantness. And so Ruth's mother-in-law was pleasant. And Ruth means friend or companion. And she is companion with Naomi. She's not leaving her. They're journeying together. And then there's also some irony. So at the very beginning, we know there's a famine in Bethlehem. Well, Bethlehem literally means house of bread. So we're told there's a famine in the house of bread. That isn't some irony going on there. And then there's a little bit of sadness in these names as well, because Naomi's two sons, one of them is Malone, is weakness or sickness. That's what his name means. We have a train going by right now, so I'm going to pause for just a second. And the other one, Chilean, his name actually means annihilation or consumption. So these are two sad names when we know that these two sons end up dead. They have sickness and annihilation as their names. But so we have this wonderful story of commitment and companionship. There's also a story of being a refugee and wandering to a land you don't know, to a people that aren't yours, in hopes of finding food. Not an easy decision to be made, not one to be taken lightly. And Naomi not only journeys once, but journeys twice, and is trying to spare Ruth from that, yet Ruth refuses. So that's, I find fascinating, Ruth's commitment. So what we frequently look at in the Hebrew Bible is a word called hesed, which is frequently used in the Psalms, but is used here as well. And in the Psalms, it's used to describe frequently God and God's love. It is a covenant love, a faithful love, an active love that is unshakable, that is unbreakable. It is God's love, hesed. And here we get to see this hesed, this covenantal active love between Ruth and Naomi. Ruth is faithful and is going to actively show Naomi this love. Even when Naomi is trying to push her away, Ruth is not having it. Ruth remains steadfast, which we talked last week about this. You know, when we have communion each Sunday, we say, even when our love failed, your love remained steadfast. And that's what we're talking about here. Even when Naomi's love failed, even when Naomi said, get away from me, go back, don't come with me, Ruth's love remained steadfast. She said, no, I'm coming. I'm clinging to you. And that's that hesed love that no matter what, it's there. So I've been trying to think about who has shown me this hesed love. This, even when I push them away, their love is still there. Or maybe even they don't have to love me and they love me anyway. Nobody would question Ruth for staying with her people, for finding another husband. In this time, if you weren't married, if you didn't have a husband or a father, you had nobody to take care of you. You were the most vulnerable in society that there was. And so nobody would blame her for going back to her mother's home and finding a husband to care for her at all and to bear sons with her. Nobody would blame her for that. She didn't have to choose to go with Naomi, yet she did. And so I've been thinking, who has shown me that hesed kind of love? And for me, I think of my grandparents. So Joanne and Mickey are not by birth my grandparents. Joanne and Mickey were best friends with my great-grandparents. And they babysat me when I was little. In fact, they watched my sister and my cousin and I. And they even helped my great-grandparents raise my mom when my mom was little. And my entire life, they have been present. They have taken me to school. They've kept me home when I've had strep throat, and then they've gotten strep throat as well. They have been at the major events in my life. They call me on a regular basis and check in and see how I'm doing. These are two people who didn't have to be my grandparents, who still don't have to be my grandparents, who didn't have to be a part of my life, yet they chose to be active and faithful in my life and to make every effort to be a part of my life. They have shown me this covenantal love, and frequently when I haven't always shown it back too. When I was, a teenager and I just took it for granted, or when I was in college, or even now living far away and I haven't called in weeks, yet my grandma calls every week to check on me. She shows me that faithful, hesed, active kind of love. This story is a story of tragedy, I think we can all fairly say. Naomi's husband dies, Naomi's two sons die, Ruth loses her husband, there's famine, which is tragedy in itself, there's another famine, they're having to travel long distances, their way of life is totally turned upside down, they're not with their people anymore, there's just tragedy after tragedy after tragedy in this story. And so I think part of this story is also about where do we go next? How do we keep going after tragedy? What happens when things don't go as we expect them to go? What do we do next? And Naomi in this story, if you keep reading, she talks about how God has not has turned God's hand against her here in this first chapter. But if you keep reading, she changes her name to Mara, which means bitter. And she kind of a little bit wants to shut down, it seems like. And Ruth, after this, has said, we can't shut down. We have to keep going. And Ruth has tried to find ways to provide for them. You read later in the book of Ruth about how she goes out into the fields after the harvest to pick up what is left. And she is kind of the one who helps Naomi find a way forward. She is kind of the one who spurs Naomi into Naomi thinking, okay, I got a plan, which you read later about Boaz. And so it's a how do you keep going after tragedy? How do you decide what comes next? And I think Naomi is so valid in wanting to be bitter and in wanting to kind of stop trying a little bit. I think that's okay. Like, those are real emotions going on. And I think Ruth responds in a perfectly valid way as well. All right, time to get moving, to figure this out. I think we all respond differently in the face of tragedy. And one of the things that is really important, I think, after tragedy is, where do we find hope and strength? Where do we find hope in what lies ahead in a future that can be? And where do we find strength to keep going until we reach that future, until we reach ultimately here the kingdom? How do we find hope and strength after tragedy? Where do you find hope and strength after tragedy? We watch a lot of Daniel Tiger in my house now, which always makes me think of Fred Rogers, who said that you need to look for the helpers after a tragedy. His mother always said, look for the helpers, you'll find them. The people who are trying to help each other. And Ruth is that helper. Ruth is the one responding and helping. And helpers are a place where we can find hope and strength. But there are lots of other places, I think, we can find hope and strength after a tragedy. I think especially after a death, one of the places we can find hope and strength is in our memories of that person. And in commemorating that person. So my great-grandfather, Milo, is someone that we grew up with. We went to the farm all the time, and he had some sayings that I will not repeat because they'll probably take my YouTube video down if I do. But one of the ways that I find hope and strength dealing with the grief from his death still, years later, is by drinking a 7 and 7. 7-Up and Seagram 7, that was his drink. And when I have a 7 and 7, I just feel his presence, and I find strength in that. He was a strong, strong man in so many ways. Some call him stubborn, which I would totally agree with, but he was just strong. I also think of his wife, my great-grandma Buckley, Grandma Irma, and she too was strong, and she used to drink a Dixie cup of water a day, maybe, like one of the little 3-ounce Dixie cups, and she would use that same Dixie cup over and over again. And we'll joke about that oftentimes when we talk about drinking water, or how we're doing drinking water in my family. And in that memory, I find hope and strength. It gives me life. I think of my grandma Judy, my dad's mom, who passed away a few years ago, and her meal that she made that everybody loved was goulash. And when my husband makes a pot of my grandma's goulash, I find hope and strength in that. So I think in grief, oftentimes we can find hope and strength in our memories and in commemorating the people who have gone before us. And I think tragedy, we find hope and strength in commemorating those tragedies as well. If we think about 9/11, many of us have seen no greater tragedy than 9/11. And one of the ways that we find hope and strength is in commemorating that day. Every year on September 11th, people post what they were doing on 9/11/2001. Every year on that day, we pause when that first plane hit the tower. Every year on that day, we commemorate that day. We remember that tragedy. We remember the lives that were lost, the people who worked to save other individuals, as a way to find hope and strength out of that tragedy. And I think that's so important, to find ways to get hope and strength following a tragedy. So this is just a little bit about Ruth, and Ruth chapter 1, verses 1 through 17, which is our scripture that we will be diving into on Sunday as well. So I encourage you to think about where you find hope and strength following tragedy. Think about who has shown you that hesed, that unshakable, active God love. And any other questions you might come up with from Ruth, post them in the comments below. I would love to discuss them with you. It's been great offering you my Thursday thoughts, and I can't wait to read your Thursday thoughts as well. Thank you.